What up, everybody? It's your boy Kentario, and I'm back again for another episode of Christ and Comic Books. And today we are looking to talk about the series of Bleach. So now that we got the story introduction out the way, I really want to hit on a couple of other pieces here, some of the extremely powerful things that Tite Kubo has done and used in his series that makes it such a great read, that makes it such a great anime to watch. I think he did this intentionally, right? I think that's one of the key things about Tite Kubo, is he wrote intentionally, he illustrated intentionally, and he had purpose behind certain things. Two things that I want to identify here with this video. One of the things he intended was culture, and he intended words. The power of both of these things were intended for this series. So when we're looking at the culture aspect, 3 cultures are recognized, at least from what I observed, 3 cultures are recognized here in the series. One of which, the Japanese culture, is represented here. Of course, we see that they're wearing the traditional kimono, one worn by, of course, samurai, and we see the reflection of samurai by the swords that they use, particularly in their base state. We'll get into words here in a second to talk about base state versus the transformations. We'll get into that here shortly. But in their base state, they reflect that of the traditional samurai. And the Order of the Gotai 13 all reflect that of samurai in their getup, as well as their swordsmanship. They teach about swordplay and the way that they fight. That's similar to a lot of that. So they speak on the Japanese culture with that of the Soul Society. Now, one of the other things that they get into is they get into the Mexican or the Hispanic culture, particularly with Chad's character, being that he's half Japanese and half Hispanic. That's one piece where that is reflected. The other piece where that is reflected is you find that in that of the Hollows. There will be a future arc where you'll find out where they're having to go to what's called Hueco Mundo, which is the place where all of the Hollows dwell, to go and, of course, save somebody else. So we find that to be a very common trend there within the Hollows. Their names, the music that's played in the anime hits on a lot of Hispanic culture. So that's tied there with the Hollows. The other thing that we find is German culture. A lot of that's found with what's known as the Quincy. Of course, in the beginning, we find them to be a wiped out race, but there's a lot more to be spoken to in regards to them if you definitely take the time to read and watch the series. So that's something that's truly important to see. So you get that first introduction to them with that of Uryu Ishida, who is, of course, the Quincy in the series. So that's something else to point out. So there's a significance in culture identified in these 3 pieces that I think extremely speaks to the volume. But there's one thing to point out. He, of course, loves culture, one of which he really does love the Hispanic culture. That's why he used it. From my opinion, I think he did a great job. I don't think any Mexican or Hispanic would be insulted by it, even though they didn't make him the bad guys, which is the Hollows, the evil ones. So it's very interesting in that point. One of the other points, too, to make here is with words. I think words was truly powerful in and of itself. So let's talk about that from the standpoint of the swords, for instance, right? With the swords, you have the Shikai state, which is the base state that I mentioned. Even with Ichigo, his base state for his Zanpakuto is the giant sword. So in and of its base form, it's large. But that's the Shikai state. Then you have what's known as the Bankai state. Bankai, which is what everyone loves to reference when it comes to the series, is the Bankai. So I love the Bankai state as well. That's when they release the hidden power of their Zanpakutos. There's a huge transformation that comes with that. There's a territorial impact that happens with that, or there might be an additional being that is manifested from it. So the Bankai state is amazing in and of itself, and even more so, you see a lot of things are reflected from that, a lot of messages reflected in that for each individual character. One character, even, I can't remember his name right now, but he has what looks like 2 sides, and they're chained together. He uses them. But one of the things you find out about the character himself is that there's a relationship between him and that of the scythe and death, but he himself actually hates death. So that's one of the reasons why he joined up to become a Shinigami, is because he wanted to prevent that. But he has to tap into that death mindset and willingness to grow as a character and to reach his Bankai state. So I think that's deep and powerful in and of itself for this particular character, and the meaning with the names and the use of these weapons. That's that significance being found there. Even in Ichigo's name, he's smart in his play here, right? So let's tie it back a little bit. Let's go back to Dragon Ball Z. One of the things about Dragon Ball Z is that they use what's called the Kamehameha attack, right? Which basically means turtle, to put it simply. It's a pun using a powerful attack at the same time. So it's meant intentionally to be funny. At least that was the purpose behind Akira Toriyama actually using that in his series. One of the things that we find, though, with Tite Kubo is he's so intentional with these words that he did a play on that with the name of Ichigo himself. Ichi meaning one and Go meaning friend, that's where he is portrayed as number one friend, which is where we find in his character constantly fighting to save his friends. So that is reflected in the name. But the other piece to that is with the character Renji that he plays on is calling him Strawberry, right? Because Ichigo in Japanese also means strawberry. So he does do a lot of word play for fun in some instances, but in others he genuinely speaks to that depth and the meaning behind these words that's being used. So that's something that's extremely powerful that we find with the series of Bleach. These are the two main things that are drawing points. Is so much intention, so much purpose, so much planning went into the design, went into the words, and went into these characters. That's why it draws people in. So here's where we're going to hit into the actual Christian side of it. So one of the things to point out, yes, we're talking about the spiritual realm. So as Christians, we know that the spiritual realm is not something to play with. No! One of the debatable things as Christians that we don't discuss as well is whether or not ghosts exist. No! Me personally, I will say no. There is no recollection of there being ghosts that exist in this realm here. If anything, there is, of course, hell. There is what's known as Abraham's bosom, which is a dwelling place for spirits that have not moved on yet. But then there is also actually heaven, which is another place where spirits go. So when we're talking from a biblical standpoint, there are some key pieces to talk about the dwelling place of spirits. Not to get into this too deep, because I want to save this for my video talking about witchcraft and magic and anime, manga, and comics. But there are things known as familiar spirits, which aren't the actual spirits of people, but they are copied spirits of people that are either sent by demons or, of course, used by witches. So that's where that is a very complex thing to discuss, and one of the things to watch out for when you're looking into certain content. So when they're talking about involving ghosts here, that's one of the tricky parts for a Christian to look at is, there's no ghosts. So to speak of that, or to think that ghosts are dwelling at their grave sites, is not something that we want to promote in the minds of people, but that concern for a soul is what I think is extremely important here, is to have a concern for souls, which is what we find with Ichigo, which is something a Christian can take away from that, is having that concern for souls. So something that they do here in the series, right? The purpose of a Soul Reaper. The Soul Reaper is supposed to allow for souls to move on. So those souls move on to the Soul Society. And then those souls moving on to the Soul Society, there's an opportunity for said soul to yet then be reincarnated. Now, I cannot recall if they do that from living in the Soul Society, or if the soul is killed, let's say, in battle. If a Soul Reaper is fighting a Soul Reaper, that Soul Reaper gets killed either by a hollow or by the Soul Reapers themselves. Their spirit is then translated back into humanity, hence reincarnation. They do a little play on that where one of Rukia's friends from her past looks a lot like Ichigo, so some people suspect that Ichigo is the reincarnated version of that said friend. So there's a little bit of play in the reincarnation. Another aspect to reincarnation here in the series is when they kill with their swords, let's say a hollow, that hollow is given the opportunity to be reincarnated as well. They're no longer that troubled soul. They are destroying the troubled aspect, allowing that soul to, in a sense, move on, either to be reincarnated or translated into the Soul Society. One of the two is taking place there. I have to do a little bit more research to come back 100%. But one of the two things is happening. Now, you may say, Christian, stay away from reincarnation. We don't believe in it. Of course we don't believe in that. And of course, I don't support reincarnation. That's not a part of what's being at least promoted from me. I don't believe in that. But what I do believe in is redemption. And when we're using the word to spread the gospel, we're not looking to do destruction to someone. We are looking to redeem someone back to the Lord. And that's one aspect of that reincarnation, is they're giving that opportunity to be redeemed in some sense for those souls. Another thing to that too is they're using their swords to save lives regardless of who's killed by it. So no matter what, in them killing someone, it's not the destruction of the soul, it's allowing that soul to move on. So that gives significance to the use of their swords. Here's where you see that being flipped, right? And I'm just saying this as a fan of the series. The Quincy's, whenever they are using spirit energy or destroying a soul, that kills the soul. The soul is dead when they do it. There is no redemption. It's completely being destroyed. So they're giving these two sides to that, and that really just kind of speaks to, you know, some of the influence when we're talking about people harnessing things in the spiritual realm. One, don't take it lightly. I strongly push for that. Do not take the spiritual realm lightly. But if you need to know what you're going in to do when you're entering into these types of things. Whatever you do, you will either lead to someone being redeemed or you will lead to someone being destroyed. And the gospel speaks of the path of walking with Christ as a narrow one. So the same thing goes when it comes to the delicacy of leading someone to salvation versus you thinking that you can just go and say and do whatever you want and it not have any spiritual consequence. That will actually lead to someone's spirit and soul destruction. So again, this gives those two halves and the extreme to that. I think that is so key and so very important. And that's something that us as Christians can truly take away from the series, is that one, we want to work towards soul salvation. Two, even when someone's fallen, they can be saved. Yes, the series is saying they've already died. So damnation be what it is, or salvation be what it is. There's no redemption for that save Jesus Christ operating in how he will. But when we're talking about how we can perceive, you know, life going forward, we need to be very concerned and cautious when it comes to someone's soul and its self-salvation. But that, everybody, is my video on Bleach. This is includes some of my personal opinions, my observations from having read and watched the series, but also this is to really speak to those concerns that Christians may have about the series, but also some aspects that are very encouraging to a Christian if they were to read or watch Bleach. That the gospel operates like a Zonpop pill. We are looking to save souls, not destroy them. It may hurt in the process, but as long as someone's life is being restored back to Christ, that's the purpose. So we kind of operate as those soul reapers. But taking on that mantle is extreme, and we have to be very careful of what we're being called to do. So that's just me and my perspective on Bleach. If you enjoyed it, thank you. Make sure you hit that like button. If you want more of this type of content, hit that subscribe because more is on the way. And I hope to see you all later. Peace.